What is this? If you answered $1, you earned 50 points. A 100-point answer is a piece of paper. The US government says it's money, so it's money. But there's nothing that guarantees the value of this money. Imagine if the United States suddenly ceased to exist, or if there was hyperinflation, or if there was a sudden monetary reform, then this money is really just toilet paper. Yet the dollar can be used anywhere in the world. That's because the dollar is a reserve currency. There's a belief that the US won't disappear, that there won't be inflation, that there won't be monetary reform. 200 years ago, you had to use gold coins to trade between countries, because it was the only thing you could trust. But gold coins were too heavy. You couldn't carry a lot of them around, so trade was limited. And if the ship capsized in a storm, the gold coins would sink with it. Merchants would be completely broke. So we came up with the idea of gold certificates. Banks wrote out certificates of deposit for the amount of gold they held. Anyone could bring in these certificates and they would give them their gold. Once this built up trust, people started trading in certificates of deposit instead of gold. This is the beginning of paper money. And it's also the beginning of the gold standard, in that you only issue certificates of deposit for the amount of gold you have. The first to adopt this approach and become the world's reserve currency was the British pound. At the time, Britain was the only superpower in the world where the sun never went down. But its seemingly eternal existence came to an end during the First and Second World Wars. The British spent too much gold on the war and couldn't print enough pounds, and with the Great Depression devastating the economy, the pound could no longer serve as the world's reserve currency. In its place, the American dollar took over. The United States made a ton of money selling munitions in both World Wars I and II. Add to that the gold rush in the West, and the United States had more than 70% of the world's gold. Military and economic power made the United States the most powerful country in the world. After World War II, Europe, whether it was the winner or the loser, was on the verge of economic bankruptcy. To get their economies back on their feet, they needed to have smooth trade. To do that, they needed to have reliable money to exchange to buy and sell things. In July 1944, representatives from 44 countries gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, USA. At this meeting, they decided to use the dollar as their new reserve currency. However, there was a strong condition attached: they must print only as many dollars as they had gold reserves. This was to avoid the possibility that the dollar could become worthless at any time. The Bretton Woods system began when the United States agreed to one of the most important equations in modern economic history: an ounce of gold is worth $35. In other words, the US could issue $35 in bills for every ounce of gold. Conversely, if someone brings in $35, they must exchange it for an ounce of gold. Taken together, this means that the dollar acts as a depository for gold, making the dollar gold. For a currency to be the world's reserve currency, it needs to have a large enough volume of currency that every country can easily spend that money. So the United States created the Marshall Plan, a program to rebuild Europe, and supplied Europe with an enormous amount of dollars. Europe was able to revive its economy, and the dollar's reserve currency status was cemented. However, there was a serious crisis in the dollar's reserve currency status. The Vietnam War had brought the US economy to a standstill. The Vietnam War began in 1955 and lasted nearly 2 decades. The United States, which had promised to end it quickly, was pouring money into Vietnam like a bottomless pit. Taking advantage of its reserve currency status, the United States was printing dollars at a furious pace, which by all accounts exceeded the country's gold reserves. In response, Europe was actually demanding that the dollar be converted into gold. There was also a political calculation on the part of European countries that wanted to prevent the United States from having a dominant position. But the United States was too bold. In 1971, President Richard Nixon unilaterally declared a gold convertibility suspension. Convertibility means to exchange. If you bring in $35, the United States won't give you back an ounce of gold. The ironclad promise was thrown away like a broken promise, and there was not a single apology from the administration. This was the end of the Bretton Woods system and the gold standard. Now that the dollar was no longer backed by gold, paper money could become, in some cases, paper shreds. The global economy was in shambles, but who would punish the already overrun United States? There was no alternative but the dollar. So the nations met at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and decided to continue to recognize the dollar as the world's reserve currency, even without gold, and to peg their exchange rates to the dollar and let them fluctuate based on economic reciprocity. This led to a series of extreme exchange rate fluctuations and currency crises for the rest of the world, except for the United States. The dollar has survived this, but the crisis continues. Moreover, in 1973, the oil shock hit. After the West supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War, Arab oil producers retaliated by raising the price of oil fourfold in a short period of time. When oil prices went up, all prices went up like crazy. The world was plunged into the worst recession since World War II. The value of the dollar plummeted as countries, including the United States, experienced hyperinflation. With the stability that is the lifeblood of reserve currencies faltering, the US looked for a way out, and diplomatic genius Henry Kissinger came up with a solution. He convinced its Arab superpower, Saudi Arabia, to make all oil payments in dollars only. In exchange, OPEC would set the price of oil, and the US would guarantee the safety of the Saudi royal family. The world was already living in a time when it was impossible to do anything without oil, so this decision caused the value of the dollar to skyrocket. The world had to scramble for dollars to buy even a single drop of oil, so the dollar became precious again, which is why it's sometimes referred to as the petrodollar. The dollar was no longer a gold certificate, it was now an oil certificate. The economies of many countries collapsed, but the United States was able to maintain its reserve currency status because of this trick.